Hey guys, this is Adam, and I am with one of my awesome coaches, Kat Peters here.
Hey
Um,
guys.
we're starting a podcast, and one of the first things we wanted to hit this week for our first podcast, it was just ADHD Awareness Week last week. So we missed it by a week, but we did want to touch base on this. I especially wanted to touch base on it with Kat because this is something aside from psychology, related to fitness and mental health. She's a very big proponent of ADHD awareness, and some of the memes and some of the things you've posted, some of the research I've seen you post was just really interesting to me. And I thought nothing would be better than to talk about this because you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, I am grateful to, get the opportunity to talk about it. It's something that I've struggled with my whole life and didn't realize that was what was going on with me. And so it's nice to have answers and to be able to help other people realize that like that might be their struggle too, and you just flew under the radar.
I think that when I look back into my journey on getting into fitness, I found that I was most passionate about some of the things I struggled with because I wanted to help other people. And, it's just so obvious to me. This is why you're passionate about it because you're somebody who has gone through this. So tell us a little bit about just your experience.
So I'll start out by saying it is kind of becoming a thing where a lot of women are getting diagnosed with ADHD. Even autism can kind of play into that. I'm just diagnosed with ADHD, but a lot of women in particular, because of hormones, which we'll get into, are diagnosed a lot later in life. And that's my experience. So I was one of the, like gifted labeled smart kids that nobody ever labeled me in school as like, hey, this girl might have ADHD, like maybe we should get her tested and see what's going on there. And it wasn't until I would say my late 20s that I was like, okay, like this is frustrating, this is a struggle. Still just kind of assumed it was normal, mostly because of going through competition preps. And we all know, like, you get diet brain, right? And a lot of that diet brain can parallel with some of the symptoms of one of the types of ADHD. So my assumption was always, oh, it's just diet brain. Oh, I'm just stressed. Oh, it's anxiety or something like that. And it wasn't until, I was done with grad school and my career was starting to calm down and things were starting to settle and I wasn't in prep anymore. And I was still having all of these symptoms. I still was very forgetful, very scatterbrained, having a really hard time just getting basic things done. And I was like, it was getting to a point where I couldn't function and it was too frustrating. And I was like, okay, something is not right. And I happened to see, as lame as it sounds, TikTok videos that I was relating to way too much. And I was like, okay, I need to maybe talk to somebody and see if this is what's going on with me and what my options are. Because it just got to a point where I didn't want to live that way anymore. So that's essentially my experience getting diagnosed at 31. So long time coming.
Yeah. Well, I think you've always been successful as what you've done. And I think, unfortunately, they might diagnose ADHD people more commonly who aren't like in the best grades in the world.
Right.
And if you were always like a straight A student, you were probably, like you said, flying under the radar.
Yeah.
Um, however, interestingly enough, I have a little bit opposite experience. I was diagnosed with ADHD at a very, very young age. And it was definitely on like school performance, essentially. And honestly, what I would do is I would just wait till last minute to get my schoolwork done. I had a super long bus ride. So it's like, I'll get it done there. But sometimes that just wasn't always enough time that I just didn't budget for. But honestly, it was just more a lack of interest. I obviously excelled at certain subjects, whether it be like science, like that mattered to me. So people would be like, why are your grades great and that health? I was always really good in sports, but I just wasn't interested. So back then they said, well, he needs to focus more. Well, I'm not focused in history class on history. It wasn't a lack of focus. It was just, I would rather be out playing. I would rather be with my friends. I would rather be, in a subject manner that was more interesting to me. Now that I'm older, I do have general interest in history, but the curriculum was kind of boring back then.
Yeah.
So I actually in college came off of ADHD meds, and I felt like I actually did better. I think part of that was I got to select my coursework. So here are the things I'm interested in. Went to liberal arts college. So there were still some of those courses that I'm like, I have to take something. So pick my poison on which is the least, just the least painful essentially. But I've done fine ever since without, but I was actually prescribed Adderall, which is one of the addicting ones.
Yeah.
I definitely gained a lot of weight coming off, because I definitely ate way more. So now I'm like kind of thankful for it because my college weight gain is essentially what got me into my fitness journey in the long run.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned like being diagnosed in childhood. So a lot of people don't realize that that is kind of the difference between males and females. So usually with ADHD, not to say that it doesn't exist in girls in childhood, because it does. And if you look back enough, you can kind of see some things that, might be a red flag for it. But essentially, generally speaking, you're going to see it more in male children than females. And that's just because of, estrogen levels. So that's why as women get older and our estrogen levels naturally start to come down, that's why those symptoms and things start to show. And you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe I did always have this because estrogen just happens to be very neuroprotective. And so with boys, you'll see that in childhood just because of that hormonal difference. And so, generally speaking, boys are diagnosed in childhood and women not so much. Another reason why we fly under the radar.
How about that? It's
It's pretty
amazing
crazy.
how many years, when I think about, when I went through this, it was a quick trip to the doctor and bam, I had prescription. And there really wasn't much testing or anything like that. So
Yeah.
we probably could have and should have just got me a tutor for history lessons, or
Yeah.
anything like that. So, my writing classes always, as we graduated to high school and stuff like that, were better because they gave you a lot more freedom on what you could write about. I felt like in middle school, like it was just so textbook, it was just kind
Yeah.
of boring. So write about George Washington, and I'm like, I would rather stab
I'd rather
myself in
gouge
the
my
eye
eyes
with a
out.
fork. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
can both
Well,
agree on that.
I mean, it is one of those things that that's where some people will feel like maybe ADHD isn't a thing, because there's some people that believe it's not actually a thing because of that. There is like a level of procrastination if you have ADHD. And again, it's just because, the ADHD brain, your lower concentration in dopamine. So you're just seeking all the things that give you that hit of like, oh, I like this, and it really stimulates your brain. But the difference is with for anybody that doesn't know that's listening to this, the difference with the ADHD brain versus a neurotypical brain, yeah, you're going to procrastinate. You're still probably only going to want to do things that are interesting to you. But at the end of the day, you can get up and do the things that you don't want to do. Right. So the ADHD brain has what we call executive dysfunction. So it's where essentially there's a disconnect. If there's something you don't want to do, it's not interesting to you, it doesn't stimulate your brain, doesn't give you that hit of dopamine, you're going to have a really hard time getting up and doing it. Even though you're yelling at yourself in your brain, hey, go do the dishes, you should really go do the dishes. It is darn near impossible to get up and go do the dishes, even though you know that you need to. So that's sort of the best way that I can describe executive dysfunction in layman's terms. I've heard some people say that it's kind of like, chores and things that aren't interesting to you feels like putting your hand on a hot stove. It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
And so it can look like procrastination. It can look like laziness, but it's really just, you know what you need to do. You want to do it, but you can't get up and do it.
Mhm. It Am I wrong? Is there a link with ADHD and like being a perfectionist as well?
It can be. It's it kind of depends. Of course, it depends on the person. But there can be a lot of psychological trauma that comes with having ADHD because, again, the labels of being a procrastinator, being lazy. And so if you're like a high functioning individual, then you might do everything you can to not be labeled as those things, even though you have this disability that limits you. So absolutely, there can be.
Absolutely. I can't think of any way to describe this and other feeling just very imprisoned by this. And that definitely has to be a very vicious cycle for people to just, think about doing those things all day long and then just not doing them until maybe the final moment. And that's
Yeah.
how I was on the school bus, getting my history work done before the stuff I like to do was always done ahead of time, and that was
Yeah.
easy.
And that's exactly it. So you hit on a really good point is a lot of the times, with that executive dysfunction, sometimes just the challenge of something, or if it's like, there's a deadline, there's like for example, when you're in school, right? And you have those teachers that are like, don't wait till the last minute on this essay. I'll know. For somebody with ADHD, we're like, challenge accepted, got this. Now it's fun, And so that's kind of sometimes you need that challenge, that thing that turns it into a game, so to speak, of racing the clock. And that can be enough of a stimulus to get you going.
Absolutely.
And yeah, the things that are interesting, super easy because one of the things I would say, I mean, of course, it is a disability to have ADHD, but one of the benefits is hyper focus. So if there's something that we like, we can zero in, tunnel vision on it, and just destroy a subject and learn it just forwards and backwards very quickly.
That's awesome. See, and I always say with it, I always kind of have this theory that we're all geared as a 10 in one way, shape, or form. So maybe some of the best looking people out there aren't the smartest people. And maybe some of the smartest people aren't the best looking people. Some people maybe seem to have it all exteriorly, but then they really don't. And I really do believe that we're all kind of formed equal with different strengths, almost like dog breeds. Like Jack Russells were made to chase rodents, and Cocker Spaniels were bird dogs. They all excel differently per breed on like what they did. And now I kind of think of that as how we used to coexist in society back in days of teepees and campfires. Heavier
Yeah.
people, were viewed as kings and queens, and they didn't really do much. You probably didn't fight those people, but you had faster people who were probably chasing down food and bringing it back. You had people who knew how to build fire. You had the science people that were helping people evolve. And, we still go by those philosophies on a day-to-day basis on our strengths and weaknesses as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. Which it's funny that you say that because I don't know how rooted in science it is, but I've heard some theories that some people believe that, ADHD, things like that, they've been around since forever, right? And that maybe people with ADHD were more of like the hunter gatherers of like the tribes because of the fact that, there is that like quick processing in the brain, like being able to notice all of the details all at the same time. And so things like that would be good for hunting food because you're going to be lack of focus can actually help because you're noticing everything all at once. So if you needed to spot food, you're good to go.
Yeah. Have you noticed any differences working with like as competitors like ADHD clients versus maybe non-diagnosed?
Yeah. I haven't had a whole lot of clients come to me and explicitly say whether or not they have a diagnosis. And hopefully after they see this, if they need to share that with me, we need to make modifications. I'm all for it, all for mental health. But I know from my own experience with preps, and then now learning about these different manifestations of ADHD, um, man, so many things that now make sense to me. So one of the things, I mean, aside from the executive dysfunction, there's a food fixation sometimes that comes with ADHD, which is just another reason why I'm a big proponent of macros over meal plans. Of course, everything, it depends on the person, but with ADHD people, we tend to have like sometimes a food that we're like, I have to eat this every single day, like of my life until I get sick of it. Um, if you take that away from somebody that has ADHD, good luck. Their prep is not going to be very successful. For me in the past, it's kind of been like ice cream or like my breakfast cereal or something. Like I have to eat those same things. There's just a couple things that I really enjoy, and everything else fair game. But if I don't have those things, it's not going to be a good day. Um, so you have things like that where you need to probably make accommodations for. Also, if you have a client like me that doesn't like cardio, it's going to be really hard to get me to do the cardio. Like I
Mhm.
will need either someone to do what they call like body doubling, where somebody does the cardio with me or is in the room with me so that I feel like I have to. Um, or it needs to be made into like some sort of fun game or something like that, which there's ways to do that.
That's funny
But
you mentioned that. I remember Zach now reaching back out to me and saying, hey, like Kat just got a bump up in her cardio and I just got my macros cut. Can I bump my cardio up instead? Because he did say, like, because I'm going to do my cardio with her kind of inevitably. And I'm like, that just kind of hit home just now. I was like, yeah, we did that. So that makes sense.
yeah, so it's things like that that I would say, as a coach, it's kind of important to know those things, even though it's not something you would think would come up in disclosing to a coach about a prep, but you do have to make those modifications sometimes. Sometimes it is just like, hey, let's find you a buddy in your area and maybe you guys can link up and, do cardio together, or at least like have some sort of checking in with each other for accountability, because sometimes the weekly check-in isn't going to be enough, or finding a really fun class or Peloton bike or, whatever it has to be, or even an idea that I've played with for clients is instead of giving them a time duration, if they have a relatively decent device that they can track calories burned on, even though it's not accurate, if at least they can change their weight as they lose weight, to give them more of a calorie burn goal instead of a time goal, because then it becomes a challenge. It's a game now, so
I
now it's,
love
oh,
that
can
you
I beat my
said that.
time?
One thing I was just now thinking about is, I can give clients workouts day in, day out. They very rarely complain about them. You tell someone, an hour of cardio. You even try to change the modes or do something they enjoy. It's just the fact of knowing that an hour of your day is gone. So it's not so much not wanting to do the task, it's the overwhelmment of knowing now you have to divvy out one full hour of your 24-hour day to something. And for some people more, but
Yeah.
I do like that we're dynamic in our approach and we can, maybe lower food instead, or maybe pull back training so there is more room for cardio. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really great, you know, thought there. I like that.
Yeah, and I mean the cool thing is too is that with like for example like treadmills, there's always those like settings that you can play with where it's like random hills or something like even though it's not going to be as consistent to control that variable in terms of calories burned, that can be a really good idea for an ADHD client too, because then it's not routine. You don't know what's coming next. Like, yeah, you're dedicating an hour of your time to something that maybe you don't want to do if you're not somebody that likes cardio. It keeps it fresh because that's what it is. It's the repetitive, redundant stuff that is not interesting and not fun and becomes boring. That can be kind of a hard sell for somebody that, if that's not your thing, which I recognize there are people that love cardio and don't so much like weightlifting. I find most people are the opposite, but there's some. So you kind of need to find a way to mix it up and make it fun. Another thing that I was thinking about, just because there are multiple types of ADHD, I have the kind that's called inattentive subtype. There's the hyperactive subtype, which most males are diagnosed with, or you can be a combo of both. But with inattentive, we're forgetful. So we get diet brain on top of ADHD is a super fun time. So, sometimes it comes down to like making sure that you're very explicit in your emails, bullet points, list stuff out, this is the change that we're going to make, so that way, if you have a client like myself, it's really easy for them to refer back to because they're going to forget, it's going to happen. For me as a coach, like that's why I like the way that I have my system set up with Google Docs because I can write things down for me. Not only does it help my clients, but it helps me because then I can go back and see exactly what it was that, where my train of thought was so that way, I'm constantly making sure that we're headed in the direction that we need to be headed in.
It is a relief to have on our ends if people do the Google Docs and we can type in them.
Yeah.
That really helps. I think it helps everybody.
Yeah.
I did have a client accidentally delete their Google Doc the other day.
I think so. I think you should be able to like go in
A week later
and
today, she
fix
just
it.
told me that she lost 5 files and she did message Google and they were able to get all of them back for her. So
That's
I
good.
think if any listeners here do accidentally do that, you can retrieve those files somehow, some way.
Good. Yeah. That's obviously super duper important. Kind of
Yeah.
need those. Very key.
But I think we covered this one well. I'm really excited to release this for our audience. If anyone has ADHD that was kind of curious about how it affects your prep, I think this was a good way and some good options to kind of combat that. So I'm really excited to share this with everyone.
Yeah, me also. And if anybody has any additional questions that you'd like to reach out and just talk about it a little more, we can put my Instagram handle in the comment section of this video. And if you're just listening to it, it's at meow and again. Spell out the whole word and then you can reach me on Instagram and my email's linked there. So whichever way you like to contact me, we can discuss it and, go over some different options that you have. Or if you're just curious about a diagnosis, I'm more than happy to walk you through that and share my experiences.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited and we will see you guys next week for our next podcast.
Yep.